Welcome to Simple Shifts Conversations to Fuel Your Body, Mind, and Soul. I'm Martha McKinnon from the blog Simple Nourished Living, and with me is my partner and brother, Peter Morrison. Hi, how
Hi
you
there.
doing?
I'm doing fine today. How
I'm
are
doing really
you?
fine. I love these conversations with you. I feel like everyone just gets me excited and motivated and inspired. So
Hmm.
thanks for doing this with me. So today we're going to talk about the one thing for weight management. Whether you're trying to lose weight, maintain your weight. There might be even folks out there trying to gain weight, but in our world, there are less of those. So, but we're figuring out how to manage the weight, the one thing for weight loss. And the idea for this came from a book I read some time ago called The One Thing. And the book was written by Gary Keller, who's the co-founder and chairman of Keller Williams Real Estate. And he wrote a book called The One Thing, The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. And basically, the book talks about and explores in great detail the fact that in his experience and from experience with a lot of successful people, that success comes down to narrowing your focus, just narrowing your focus to one thing at a time. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Without a
so I
doubt.
started to read the book and immediately I took all of the lessons that it was putting forth because it was talking about success in your business life or your personal life or, your health and wellness, whatever you were focusing on. But I immediately, because I tend to see everything through the lens of what we do, on Simple Nourished Living, which is a real focus on, you know, weight management, healthy eating, healthy living. And so I immediately saw it through that lens of like the one thing for weight management. And I immediately recognized the fact that so many of us, when we're trying to figure it out, we're frustrated, we're overwhelmed, we take on everything and we try to just change up everything and we get overwhelmed and frustrated and we spin our wheels and we're going right and left and today we're doing this and tomorrow we're doing that and we're looking for the one best solution and it keeps us kind of spinning and spinning and spinning and not really moving forward in any significant way because of that lack of focus. So the suggestion in the book is to be asking yourself, what's the one thing that you could do such that by doing that one thing, everything else would become easier or unnecessary? So that's the question to just keep asking yourself, what's the one thing I could do, such that by doing that, everything else would become easier or unnecessary in any aspect of your life that you're trying to conquer, whether it be, getting your finances in order or building your business or improving your relationships or you know eating better, exercising more, managing your weight. What's the one thing that you could do that if you did it, and if you figured it out and then you focus on that and you just make that your focus until the point where it gets easy, and then you can move on to another thing and another thing instead of just trying to do everything at once. We're designed to focus and not to just try to do everything. So I'm going to hit you with the question. So I could share like what my one thing was on this whole journey, but um oh, and maybe that's best for me to do. So when I read this book, I immediately thought like, what's the one thing? What's the one thing? And the thought that came into my head that has stayed with me since reading the book a few years ago is that everything gets easier for me if I live within my means. That means like financially. And I often think of like weight management as analogous with managing your budget. Like if you live within your means, like if I learn to live within my means, if I learn to live within the amount of food that, I can eat without gaining or losing weight, then everything's going to get easier. So that became sort of my overarching, like, so one thing, if I focus on, because so many of us, I think for a long time, for me, I think I fought against reality. It's like somehow, I think for, weight management can get really, really simple if you let it be really, really simple. If you weigh more than you want to weigh, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that you're taking in more energy, you're taking in more food than your body needs. And you can fight that, you can argue with that, you can get mad because your metabolism is too slow. You can fight reality, but at the end of the day, if you just embrace that, accept that, and start moving forward from there, then it gets easier. And it's like, okay, so that's now I need to just figure out what I can eat and how much I can eat, to stay where I am, or if I'm trying to lose, how do I eat a little bit less so that I can, um, lose the excess weight? Because if we're carrying excess weight, what does that mean? It means we've taken in more energy than we needed, right? And we've got reserves, we've got extra stores, and that we're going to need to call upon, we're going to need to eat less than we need energetically so that our body can call upon those stores so that we can get back to the equilibrium that we ultimately want to achieve. And when I started to think about it that way, it got easier for me. And when I started to think about it in terms of my budget, like if you're constantly living month to month, depending upon your credit card and extending yourself that way, it's going to create an imbalance in your life. And for me, I lived like that, and it created tremendous amounts of stress. Just like eating more than I needed, created stress in the fact that I hated the way I looked, I hated the way I felt, I hated that I couldn't fit into my clothes. I hated that I was always in this sort of fight with food and my body and my relationship with myself. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, and after that, then my thought was, in terms of living within my means, what are the things that kind of tripped me up in my life? And I found what tends to trip me up is getting to the end of the day without a plan. Getting to the end of the day, you've had a long day, you've worked hard, you've had a commute, um, you're tired, and you want to eat, but you don't really have a plan. And when you don't have a plan, then you do what's easy. You go out, you stop for fast food, you grab, you take out, you do what's convenient. You dial for pizza, you dial for Chinese food, and then you end up overeating those foods. They tend to be, caloric, and you just end up in this vicious cycle. So when I thought about the one thing that would really be helpful for me, it was like to have food, like readily available in a really easy way. And so for me, the tool in my kitchen that became a real life changer was the crock pot, the slow cooker, because
Mm.
I started to depend upon that, in a way where, you have a plan early in the day. And for example, I just did it, recently. You find an easy recipe, you load the food in the crock pot, and then you can step away, you get on with your day. And then when you're hungry, you've got something there ready and able, ready, willing, and able to be served up. And it just takes out all that thinking. Because for me, as the day progresses, again, I lose, focus, lose energy. And sometimes even if you have a plan for what you want to cook, but that requires a lot of cooking at the end of the day, you kind of lost your motivation. And so I found the slow cooker to be magical because I'm in the morning, I have more energy, I'm less distracted, get the stuff in there, and then then it's done. And I feel the same way about having some prepared foods in the fridge, like we've talked about the components. If I've got some rotisserie chicken, and I've got some, cooked vegetables, and I've got, some salad vegetables that I've prepped that don't need to be washed and chopped. It makes, figuring something out for dinner just so much easier. So for me, the slow cooker became that one thing that really helped make sure that I would have food available when I needed it so I wouldn't opt for those less healthy choices.
Do you think so? You said something earlier about you seem to be fine during the day. It was like the end of the day that would trip you up. So you felt like morning, like the first part of your day, you didn't
I never
struggle
really
with
struggled, like, if I think back to and I
struggle.
think, and I'm taking it back to because now I do work from home and I have a lot more control over my
Yeah.
schedule, but I think back to when I really sort of was struggling and caught, in the vicious cycle, um, and it seemed to be dinner. I mean, I will say that as I look back on it, I mean, there were struggles early in the day, but that was at a time when I was just totally on a like if I look back at the weight loss struggle, there was a time when I was just oblivious to what I was eating and what I was doing, that got me to the point where I stepped into Weight Watchers and then I started to learn and become aware of just how much I was overeating.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a time when um I was overeating at breakfast, I was overeating at lunch, I was overeating at every meal, but I was oblivious to it. And then there came a point when I learned, the fact that I was overeating, that I was taking in a lot more food than, a person of my frame needed. And I started to appreciate just how many calories, in some of the foods that I just ate without even thinking about it. So there was a huge shift in understanding that happened. And then from there, if I think about, where the struggle over time, like where the struggle really came in, I think breakfast got really easy because I think it just went on automatic pilot. I found that and lunch, the same thing. I think those kind of they got sort of easier where I just have had these rotation of sort of healthy options. I never typically woke up in the morning and wanted to like undermine my day with a donut. That just doesn't really happen for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was
Mm-hmm.
really happy to eat, something more healthy and nourishing. And I learned about the importance of, eating a healthy, balanced breakfast. And then, of course, with the intermittent fasting experiments, then breakfast sometimes became a non-issue because sometimes I would skip breakfast and my first meal
Mm-hmm.
would become lunch. So yeah, I mean, so as I think about it, the real wild card for me became dinner because especially as we moved into working on the website and just spending a lot of time, the day gets away from you, you have a plan, you work really hard, you get to the end of the day and you're tired, and that's when for me it could like spin out and say, well, let's just go get food, or
Mm-hmm.
let's just order
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, or um where if I could have something in the slow cooker, then that wouldn't even be an issue anymore because now I had something healthy, ready and waiting for me when we were ready to eat it. So that was really helpful for me. How about you? If you really thought about like um, an area that challenges you right now, I mean, if you thought about one thing you wanted to shift or change.
Well, I was thinking back a few
Hmm.
years, and as you were sharing your story, I think for me, my issue or whatever issues I had, if I felt like they weren't necessarily weight, but maybe overeating, I think when I really embraced time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, like everything became
Yeah.
easier
Why do you think that was?
for me because I
Like, what's the magic about? I mean, because I'm also a fan of the time restricted eating. I mean, and I was hesitant when you talked about your success with
hmm
it. There were a lot of hesitancies that came up for me that we can talk about, later. But like, what do you think was so helpful for you with the intermittent fasting?
well I've never been a big
Hmm.
breakfast eater, so it made sense if you're doing intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, it made sense to eliminate or to use the time in the morning because you're already naturally fasting while you're sleeping anyway. So it made sense to extend for me to extend that
Hmm.
window. Um, so, um, what was your question again?
Why do
I
you think
got
it was so like, Ben, you said everything kind of sort of shifted for you with the intermittent fasting. And I'm just like, well, what was the shift, or why do you think that there was a shift with that um, approach?
I just feel, I guess when I when I found a time that worked for me, I felt like I could be less careful with what I was eating for lunch and dinner because the window in a 24-hour period that I'm not eating 16 or 18 hours a day. It's a much smaller window, so I'm going to naturally not eat as much because when I'm full or it's harder to for me to overeat in a shorter window. And I felt like, if I wanted to have French fries with lunch or on the occasion, not all the time, but on occasion, or um, have dessert because it sounded
Mhm.
good. It just, I'm still getting, a fair amount of calories without overdoing it. Um, I felt like I was not depriving myself of anything food wise. I was depriving myself of the length, the times when I was eating, but that seemed easy because my mornings were busy or not being a breakfast eater. It just seemed easy. Does that make
Yeah, I mean,
sense?
I think what I'm hearing you say is that by limiting yourself to essentially 2 meals a day or limiting yourself to an 8-hour eating window, it seemed to take the pressure off all of the individual decisions you had to make at every single meal, and it gave you more flexibility about what you would choose to eat, and it felt a little more freeing. You didn't feel like you had to be more so restrictive. You were restricting the
Hmm.
time, but you weren't having to restrict everything you ate. Is that right? I mean,
Right, right. Because in 8 hours, you can only or 6 hour, whatever the time is that you're eating, you can only eat so much, and you're full. You're still living your life. You're doing other things, so it's not like you're feasting during those
right. So, I mean,
times.
I think again, you have to
Um,
have a healthy attitude, right? Because I think there are some people who struggle um, and tend to
mhm.
overeat,
And it's
right?
not
It's
for
not for
everybody.
everybody. So there are some
Hmm.
people who it doesn't work for because they end up eating they end up taking in an excess of calories even during this shorter window. So you have to kind of know yourself. It's
Mm,
an
mm,
experiment. My experience was very much like yours. And in the beginning, I was hesitant because I think I had a lot of, and we can discuss this. It could be a whole episode about my issues around my fear of hunger, and things like that. But I think I was afraid of hunger. I was afraid that I would get over hungry um, using time restricted eating. I had like fear around it. I don't know. I can't even explain why at this point, but I did try it and I was absolutely blown away. And I read about it and it started to make sense for me because what I discovered about myself and what I'll still say is that every time I eat, it's an opportunity. There's a potential to overeat. If you're not tuning into
mhm,
yourself, every time you open that your kitchen and you start taking in food, if you're not really paying attention to your signals, the more first, so for me, the more times a day that I eat, the more opportunities there are to eat more than I need, right? And so by restricting the time and limiting myself now to a certain number of hours, coupled with really trying to tune in, which I'm continuing to, tune into, is really tuning into my hunger and my satisfaction, learning to stop and pause and pay attention to when I've had enough and not just eating food because it's there. And I'm playing with like lightening up my servings a little bit just, to play with this. But yeah, the combination of trying to tune in and limit the times a day I ate was very, very beneficial for me. And I learned, I mean,
mm,
this was another great lesson that hunger's nothing to be scared of. Hunger's a signal.
mhm,
But it's been fun to be curious and to notice and to learn about hunger, and for me to realize that it ebbs and it flows, and it can come and it can go. And I know that if I'm really engaged in something that I love to do, I can be oblivious, right? That there's things out in the universe that feed me beyond food, which is pretty
mhm,
exciting for somebody
mhm,
who's really
mhm.
struggled with their relationship with food. So, yeah.
I actually love the feeling of hunger. Not in a like not in a masochistic, like painful kind of way, but it's I don't like eating when I don't feel like I'm hungry. Or I mean, we all eat when we're sometimes when you're not hungry. Oh, everybody's going out
Right.
and I mean, we all do that, but when I actually let myself feel hungry, I don't know, the food
It
tastes
does.
better.
I mean, I think
I it
there are
just
quotes that say hunger's the best sauce, I mean,
mm,
and so I think
mhm,
you're in a really, really healthy place with recognizing the fact that you want to go into a meal a little bit hungry, looking forward to it because the food is
mhm.
going to taste better. And if you start off eating when you're not hungry, how can you possibly know when to stop?
Uh,
You know, you you have to start to gauge and get attuned with your body and its signals and its feelings, right? And the more you
mhm,
practice it, you know, and sometimes in the beginning, if you're really tuning in, maybe you're going to undereat because you're like, oh, I've had enough. And then you discover, well, an hour later, so you learn the signals and what feels
mhm,
good and what feels
mhm,
doesn't feel good. And you learn what it feels like to overeat. And what I found too is that I don't beat myself up about that anymore either, because sometimes you just need to, oh yeah, that was too much. I need to know, I would need to remember that. And so it's just all a learning and an experimentation with really, again, this goes back to trusting yourself and trusting that you do have this inner wisdom, but you have to be brave enough to really experiment with it and trust it and believe it and not believe that you're not to be trusted, because I think we all are very, very wise, at our core. And if we start to tap into
mhm.
that, it can be really powerful.
And for me, I think secondarily to that, to time restricted eating, secondarily, I think is we've it's not intentional, but we've sort of slipped into certain days of the week we eat
Hmm.
certain meals, and it just again it sort of makes everything else easier around that. It's we grill salmon, and the salmon we buy provides enough for 2 meals, so we have the fresh salmon Sunday with dinner, and then the leftovers
Hmm.
Friday night. So boom, there's 2 days you don't have to think
Right.
about dinner. Thursday is Trader Joe's chicken
Right.
parmesan, with salad. We don't that's another day we don't have
Right.
to think about. So,
And
um,
again, I think we are, oops,
if
sorry.
you can no, I'm just gonna say if you can tolerate's not the right word, but if you find meals you really like and can repeat them or find simple ways to change them up, but they're easy preparations or, um, satisfying, then I think it's okay to make certain days certain meals. Every day doesn't have to be a brand new something you've never had
Right.
before.
So, and again,
Because that's very
yeah, right. Because this takes us right back to atomic habits, right? And if you're trying to create a new habit, if you're trying to eat healthier, then those questions, how do I make it attractive? How do I make it obvious? How do I make it easy? How do I make it satisfying? Sort of just fits right in with this. And how do I, what's that one thing such that if I were doing it, everything else would become easier and unnecessary. And if we're having to overthink it, if we're making it harder like than it needs to be,
Mhm,
you've done some great work about making it easy for yourself. If you know salmon, Sundays are for salmon, then that frees your thinking, right, to focus on other
mhm,
things.
mhm,
And that's something that comes up in the
mhm,
whole willpower discussion, the fact that the more decisions we have to make on a variety of topics, the more we're having to do, the more decisions we have to make. There is this sort of decision fatigue that makes maintaining our self-control harder over time. And so I think what you're doing is brilliant in terms of finding a way to nourish yourself in a way that feels easy and effortless, because I think that's what we want to get to make it as enjoyable and effortless as we can, um, for sure.
and I also think, like, sometimes my digestion, like, everything even works, like, life just works better when again, it's not a 100% repeat. There's for always variety, but there's something about the regularity and the consistency and just that for me personally, that just works really well. Sometimes if you're introducing a whole, new spices or new things and, things don't always,
Yeah,
you
your
know,
digestion can be affected, right? I remember reading that in a
and then it affects your
yeah,
sleep and it affects your mood and it just
right?
like,
For
yeah,
sure.
it
And I
just,
think there are a lot of other cultures, more simple cultures where the food isn't as complicated as it is here for us, and that there are just sort of
mm,
a set, number of options that people return to again and again, and again. And that you're not just eating such a wide, you know, it's almost like in some ways we've turned food like into entertainment as opposed to just figuring out what nourishes us, what feels good. Of course, you want it to taste good and be enjoyable, but it doesn't have to be a sport, right? It doesn't have to be entertainment. If you find the
mhm,
foods that work for you, why wouldn't you want to, if you love
mhm,
something, why wouldn't you want to eat it several times, a month? Um,
right,
so,
right.
and yeah, if you find something that you like and it tastes good and it's easy and it works for you and it leaves you feeling good and energized, I mean, that's like a win-win. Um, if we could all get to that point, right, where we had a very set menu that worked for us, it probably shifts a little with the seasons, right, depending on where we live, shifts with
Sure.
special occasions,
Mhm,
but overall, just to find a pattern. And I think that that's what I've done over time. You find what your breakfast is, you find what your lunch is, you find your dinners that work. And then then it frees up all this time and space for other things. I think a lot of us who struggle around like weight and healthy eating realize that this is talk about food noise. And this whole topic ends up just taking up way too much time and energy and space in in our lives and in our brains. And once we can figure out the routine that works, it's like, hallelujah, I've got time and space for other things, beyond like, what am I eating
mhm,
next?
mhm. And it's amazing to me how, I mean, we've only done 20, this is our 24th
Hmm.
episode, but how many, and we've had a variety of topics, but how many, there's so much similarity. Oh, it pulls you back from this book or that. There's so many things that repeat from mindless eating to the one thing to atomic habits. I mean, there's so much similarity. It's kind of mind-boggling when you step back and think
So,
about.
am I hearing you say that like a relatively simple concept has become over complicated in our world? Or, I mean, or that there's
That
these simple
or
threads that keep showing up from a variety of sources,
yes,
these
yes,
common threads.
yeah,
And when we start to see these
yeah,
common threads, it can get easier, right? I think. And and you can just
hmm,
trust it more that you're on the right track.
right, right. Because you could apply like the one thing, like the whole mindless eating book. Well, one thing, well, use smaller plates. Well, that might make everything else
Right,
easier. Or leave the fruit bowl on the counter, but put the potato chips and candy in a hard to
right.
reach place.
So
There's
yeah.
just,
So when you
yeah.
take this one thing concept and you overwrite it on all of the other uh, things that we've talked about, you can suddenly say, like, well, yeah, so what is my one thing that would make this easier for me? Right. And I think, yeah, is it cleaning up my pantry so that I'm less tempted by
Hmm,
the snacks and
hmm,
things that I really don't want to indulge in? Or is it taking time to deep breathe? Is it focusing on my sleep? Because does everything just go wonky when I'm sleep deprived? So whatever that one
hmm,
thing is where you start to focus, you're going to start to get some traction now and make some progress where there's a good chance that you've spent weeks, years, spinning and spinning and spinning. So I think this whole concept of the one thing really can give us the focus that we need to get some traction. And once you get some traction and you start having some progress, that's when the magic starts to happen, because now you start to spin in an upward spiral and you start to think of other one things and other like shifts, and it just starts to snowball and it gets easier and easier and easier over time. But
Yeah, and you
you create
create
momentum,
momentum and it just
right? And
easier.
momentum is
Mhm.
huge.
Right.
And I don't think momentum is something that can be forced. I think it's something that has to like sort of, I think it's a natural force that needs to build. But you can never get momentum if you can't get started. And you can't really get started if you don't have a
Mhm.
focus. And so that's why I was really excited about this whole concept of the one thing, because just start with one thing, get some success there, and then just trust in the snowball effect and the momentum that will come from that.
So what's your one thing? Let's ask for readers to maybe leave their one thing
Yeah, that
for
would be
us in the
great. So if
comments
people
below.
would love to, people who tune into this would love to share what their one thing is, I'd love to know. I love to learn. I feel like I have pen pals all over the world because I get a lot of comments and interchange through the email newsletters that we send out several times a week. And so this is just another way to build that kind of relationship and learn more about the people who are tuning in and how we might learn from them and also support them in their goals.
If you've liked this, I'd say please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We'd love to keep growing our audience. Share it with anybody you feel might find it helpful or useful.
Yeah.
And thanks for the
And
nice
thanks for tuning
dialogue.
in, and we'll be back soon. Have a great week, everyone.
Have
Bye
a good
bye.
day. Bye bye.